Hello everyone, this video is designed to give you an overview of the lesson plan assignment that will be due at the conclusion of the semester of this course. The reason I'm making this video is although there are directions in numerous places and a clear expectation in written form of what I'm looking for in the lesson plan, I have found that some students really appreciate having an auditory review as well. So hopefully this will help those of you who feel that you need that form of instruction. So the first thing I want to cover is that, as with all other projects, everything that you need for the lesson plan is in this module here: major projects, details, templates, and submission links. Down towards the bottom of this section, so it's after the observation project and after the website project, you're going to see the lesson plan project description and scoring guide. It is critical that you read this document. This has all the information for exactly what needs to be included and how you're going to be graded on this assignment. Then I have a copy of a DOK recap because you are expected to reference DOKs in your lesson plan. So this is probably a reminder from your foundations class, but wanted to put that on here as well. Then I have the Madeline Hunter lesson plan format. The reason this is on there, we don't use Madeline Hunter, but I know that in other classes you have had previously, sometimes your instructors will let you use this as a guide or a basis. So I have also referenced that because the feedback from other students tells me that they appreciate having that as a reference when needed, and it also ties into some of the things on the required template. So I'll show you how that ties in. And then here is a link to the required lesson plan template, and we're going to review that in just a second. And then here's the link where you submit your assignment. So let's go back and talk about this required template. I already have this opened on my computer, so you'll see here that this is the required template. So you need to open this on your computer and you need to save it wherever you normally save your documents, either on your desktop or your flash drive. And this is the same format that you're using for your other classes, but the expectations in my class may be slightly different than what you're getting from your other instructors based on the nature and the objectives of my class. So just know that up front, that it is the required template, but some of the expectations may be a little bit different. So as we get started here, you're obviously going to put your grade level, the subject area, and then the length of the lesson. If you're doing something that takes up more than one day, you'll want to put this in here. So for example, if it is a 2-day lesson that's 20 minutes each day, then it'll be 2 days, 20 minutes each day. However, that's going to be outlined. But I have a note here. I often find that a lot of students think they have to submit a whole unit, 5 or 10 days of teaching the same topic. That's not really required for this class. Once again, I'm not going to talk about your other classes, but in my class, I'm looking for a lesson, a single lesson. Oftentimes, a lesson can extend beyond one day, depending on the nature of the task, but I am looking for one lesson. So please know that I'm not looking for an entire unit, just one lesson. So that's just a little side note for you. As you move through the template, you're going to see that the sections are all the same, but in the box following each of the standard headings, I don't adjust the standard headings at all, but I do add details in the boxes here. So for example, you have your standards, quality indicators, and skills section. Well, then down here in a bulleted list, I have put a few notes that I think will help you as you move along. So as you're ready to actually complete this template, you're going to go in and delete what I have in there and then begin typing right over it. And you will just type your standards here, and you would continue to type. So I'm just going to undo for the purpose of getting a visual here, but that is basically how you're going to do this. So you're going to read my information along with the other information regarding the lesson plan, and then once again you're just going to highlight it, delete it, and type right over it. So if you want to print this out so that you have it next to you as a guide, that might be helpful. So in the standards section, once again, it's referring to the Missouri Learning Standards. I've given you the exact information on how to write them, as well as a link to where you can get those. So I think that part will be pretty self-explanatory. I don't find many students who struggle with that. Then when you get into the learning goals and objectives, you do need 2 to 3 objectives. And just a reminder, we've talked about students will be able to, remember in the objectives, you're telling me what the students are doing. Many times people want to say, my objective is to teach the students. Okay, I want to know, what are the students going to be able to do? As a result of this lesson, the students will be able to. So please make sure that your objectives are measurable. things like the students will be able to use, the students will be able to learn, the students will be able to know, those are not objectives that are going to yield you a measurable outcome. So please make sure it's something measurable, something that you can assess. And consider your DOK levels when you're constructing your objectives. I know that many of your instructors require different DOK levels. I don't put any requirements on that, but obviously it strengthens your lesson plan to have a variety of DOK levels included. So I do encourage you to consider that. Here is a link to that information. And then once again, back on the course website, there's a whole recap on DOK. So then as you go into the assessment section, please remember that this is your assessments before, during, and after. You must include all three. So I have pretty high expectations on this part, because if your objectives are measurable, then your assessments are very important so that you can measure whether or not your objectives have been met. So I have a note in here that if you work with a Madeline Hunter template as your guide, then here's the sections that you need to include. Also, keep in mind that you have to assess your students at various points throughout the lesson, or else you could have wasted the whole day teaching a lesson and not find out until the end that they didn't understand or that they misunderstood what you were teaching. So it's very important. You'll also notice here that I have that you must include a rubric or a scoring guide. This is likely for your end of the lesson or after the lesson assessment. I need to know exactly how you're going to assess whether or not the students met the objective. Technology must be involved in at least one of these assessments. So in at least one assessment, either before, during, or after, technology needs to play a role in that. Remember, this is technology for teachers. So we need to see you using that. And then each assessment must be identified as formative or summative, and both types should be included in the lesson plan. So there's quite a few details in here and a lot of important things. And once again, you're going to highlight, delete it out, and then type over that information when you complete your actual lesson plan. The next section, the lesson structure and procedure. So this is by far the most important part of the lesson plan. And if you look at the scoring guide, which is on the website right here, you'll notice that it's heavily weighted towards this section. So what I can tell you here is these directions should be so detailed that they could be followed by a substitute in your absence. Every single thing for the entire lesson from start to finish should be included in this section. So if it's anywhere on your plan, if it's in the assessment section, instructional strategies, learning activities, anywhere, it should be in this section. Don't assume because it's in another section that I know where it's going. This should be very, very detailed. I cannot stress that enough. So everything from start to finish. Typically, this section is best written in a numbered list because it also sequences the steps that you will take in the assignment. So if I were you, I would type this out in a numbered list section. It is imperative that you use at least 3 uses of technology. And remember, one of them has to be in your assessment. So at least one of the 3 would be an assessment. You need 2 other uses of technology in this lesson. The students must be directly using technology in at least one of the 3 uses. So you using the smartboard to model or for instructional input is considered a form of technology, but the students are not directly using that. So make sure that in at least one of the 3, the students are directly using the technology. And then I have, once again, a reference to the Madeline Hunter template if you're using that. Under the instructional strategies, so this is what methods are you using to teach your students. So you might be doing summarizing, note-taking, lecture, cooperative learning, advanced organizers. What are you doing to teach? I have students, well, let me jump down to this. Then you have learning activities. So this is what the students are doing. What are the students doing? So instructional strategies are what are you doing to instruct, and learning activities are what are the students doing to learn. So a lot of times this is guided practice. And I've even given you an example here. If you had, say, students are making predictions, and you need at least 3 to 5 different activities, and you need to reach the different learning styles. So I often have students who have trouble with differentiating between instructional strategies and learning activities. one of the things that I have suggested that they do is if they go to the lesson structure, because once again, everything should be in here from start to finish. I tell them to get 2 different color highlighters and go through this section once it's written and very detailed and highlight in one color everything that you're doing as the instructor, and then highlight in a different color everything the students are doing to learn. If you do that, then your instructional strategies and your learning activities are pretty self-explanatory. Break it down. What are you doing? If you're doing it, it's in the instructional strategies. If the students are doing it, it's in the learning activities. So hopefully that will help you to decipher those two. Then the resources and materials. Remember, it's important that you think about yourself actually being in the classroom and teaching. So this should be a comprehensive list of everything you need start to finish to teach this lesson. And once again, think about it if a substitute were there. If you weren't there at the last minute, what is a list of everything the substitute needs to complete the lesson? Then down here, the list of technology. Remember, this is a technology class, so your lesson must incorporate the students using technology. You need at least 3 different uses of technology, so outline them here and what tools you need. So if you need a printer, a digital camera, laptops, iPads, everything should be in there. And remember, the students must be using at least one of those. The next section is the differentiation, accommodations, modifications, and increase in rigor. So in here, there are obviously many examples of differentiation that we could ask you to provide. So I have limited it to 4 things that I'm requiring. You are, of course, welcome to have more than this, but at minimum, I'm requiring what are you going to do for students above grade level? What are you going to do for students below grade level? How will you modify it for exceptional learners? And how will you modify it for ELL? Now, with that being said, if you have an interest in working with students with autism, or you have an interest in working with students who are visually impaired or hearing impaired, or any other specific type of student that you plan to work with, you will probably want to address that in this section, because if you want to use this lesson plan later in your career or your pursuit to be a teacher, you will want an administrator to see that you are already thinking about that particular student and how you might better help them in the classroom. So don't limit your modifications to just what I've requested here. Consider any other students that you expect to be working with in your future. Then the next section is classroom management. I find a lot of students in this section, they want to put simply what the rules will be. Here's the rules, and then here's what's going to happen if you do or don't follow the rules. Well, that isn't your classroom management. That's your rewards, your consequences, and your expectations. Classroom management is, what are you going to do to manage the classroom? So what routines will you have? Will you walk around and observe the students while they're working in small groups? Will you be using a computer monitoring system to know what they're doing on their screens? Will you stand in a particular spot in the classroom so that you can see all the computers while the students are working? Will you give them warnings a few minutes before they're expected to wrap up what they're working on? That's just some examples, but what are you going to do to manage the classroom environment? Like I said, this is not what your rules are. This is what you're going to do. The next section is extensions. So there's quite a bit that goes into this section, but I have in here that this occurs after learning the new material once the teacher is certain that they fully understand the concepts. So it's important that we provide students the opportunity to practice what they've learned. And sometimes it's in a non-assessment type situation. So for example, if you teach the lesson and they complete an assessment, maybe a few days later, you're going to have them take that information and do something else with it so that they can continue to retain and understand that. Think about activities for early finishers, students who are already, learning that information. So this is where the extension comes in. And then last but not least, we have follow-up. So similar to an extension, a follow-up lesson is going to be something that you're going to continue to come back to and build upon. So In the extension, we're kind of taking what they've learned and just kind of extending that. With the follow-up, we're kind of building on that and growing that. So maybe you taught addition of 2-digit numbers in your lesson. So maybe the follow-up is that we're going to teach addition of 2-digit numbers with carrying or something like that. So how will you follow up and maybe build on that for the next lesson? And then obviously there's an additional information section if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about that hasn't been included in here. One thing that I can tell you that may help you understand and realize the emphasis once again of this lesson structure and procedure section. When I go to grade the lesson plans, I actually read this section first, lesson structure and procedures. I like to read the whole lesson from start to finish and truly understand what I see and envision when you're teaching this lesson. So I read this whole section, lesson structure and procedure, start to finish. And then I go back and I start at the beginning and I look at the standards, and that way I can recall the lesson that I've just read that you've described and say, would it meet those standards? And then I read the objectives and I decide whether or not those objectives are actually accomplished through the teaching of that lesson. And then I read the assessment. Okay, are those assessments? And while I'm reading those, I'm not only figuring out the quality of the information there, but I'm also making sure that it's accounted for. So if you're doing an assessment in here that during the lesson, you're going to ask them to do fist to 5, or at the end, you're going to have them do an exit slip. Well, all of that needs to be in this lesson structure and procedure section. I can't emphasize that enough to you, and that's something that I see students struggle with. So once again, I read this section first, then I go through and read all the other sections, and to be honest, I come back and read this whole section again. And that really helps me to kind of piece it all together. So once again, this part is just so important. And I think that if you followed a similar route and maybe writing this part first and really perfecting it, it'll help you break down the other sections as you go along. With that being said, I know that you have hopefully by this time written several lesson plans. I hope they were successful for you. If they were, I'd encourage you to stick with whatever steps and strategies you had used previously. And if they were not successful, I hope that you're open to some new ideas, or that you will ask for help in the areas you think you need improvement on. We will work throughout the entire semester on the breaking down the different sections and what those things entail, as well as how to incorporate technology into those. So I truly feel that by the end of the semester, you will feel better about this process. But if not, as always, please do not hesitate to ask. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. I appreciate you taking the time to watch it. And please know that this is such a critical component of your future as a teacher that it is important that you are proficient in writing lesson plans. Thanks again, and have a great day.